Someone online recently queried how I wear my watches in a YouTube comment. And coincidentally, this is something I've been thinking about sharing with you, hence this latest post. So thanks very much for the prod. The protruding bone in the wrist, which I've circled here, is called the ulnar styloid process. I'm just going to call it the bone. ChatGPT describes the ulnar styloid as being a bony projection at the distal end of the ulna, one of the two long bones in the forearm. It can be felt and seen more prominently in some individuals, especially when the wrist is in certain positions or if there is less soft tissue covering it. ChatGPT goes on to say, wristwatches are typically worn just above the wrist joint where this ulnar styloid process is located. I believe this is here. AI tells me that this positioning allows for comfort and ease of movement. I happen to have a reasonably pronounced bone, and it's around this that I take my wrist measurement, which perhaps now means that my wrist is actually even more skinny than I previously thought. Apparently, wearing a watch directly over the bone can cause discomfort due to the pressure on the bony prominence, especially if the watch is tight. Clearly, I don't find this to be the case. And apparently, for optimal comfort, it's recommended to wear the watch slightly higher on the forearm, away from the bone. This ensures that the watch sits securely and comfortably, avoiding any potential irritation or pressure on the bone. Well, that might be what ChatGPT reports after scouring the internet, but it's not what works for me. Nobody ever told me how to wear a watch. I think I just put my watch on and this is where it felt right, to me at least. That's to say, no one ever told me until I went to try on the tambour at Louis Vuitton. That day, Daniel, the chap I met at LV, told me that obviously this is how you wear a watch, as if it was, well, obvious. Hearing him say this, and the way he delivered the sentence, was a bit of an eyebrow raiser for me. I'd honestly never paused to think about how I wore my watches. I'd never noticed how others did it. Just that I wore a watch on my left wrist. At the time, I didn't care for what Daniel said, and my instinctive reaction was initially to feel resistance to what he was saying. I think in my head I was actually thinking, sod you, pal, I'll wear my watch any way I choose. But then, sometime after leaving the store, I didn't make the purchase and my fervour towards the tambour has since cooled, I found myself circling back to what Daniel had said and wondering whether I was doing something wrong. As I recall, he'd witnessed me put the tambour on my wrist, and at first I'd wriggled it back and fro to get comfortable and to see how balanced the watch felt on my wrist. Daniel had then put another version of the same watch on his wrist, deliberately above the bone, ostensibly to show me how it looked on his wrist. And then he said it. Obviously, this is how you wear a watch, not on the bone. Nobody wears it on the bone. I think that second-guessing oneself is a very human response, either to criticism or as a reaction to statements that jar. Well, at least I, for one, tend to question myself when I come under criticism, and that's what I since found myself doing. Of course, I don't believe I'm doing anything wrong by wearing my watch on the bone. Of course, how I choose to wear a watch is entirely up to me, hence my adverse instinctive response to being told, obviously you don't wear a watch on the bone. But being open-minded, I have recently tried wearing some of my watches off the bone, so to speak. It feels a little odd, and my wrist feels slightly strangled by the tightness of the watch around the more fleshy parts of my arm. I have found an advantage. I cycle around London a lot, and wearing a watch up my wrist and off the bone is indeed more comfortable when cycling, because there is otherwise a tendency for the crown to knock into the back of my hand, at least when navigating anything other than a smooth road surface. Depending on the watch, it can hurt. And that tends to happen more so with some of my larger, heavier watches. But beyond that, it just feels a bit odd for me to wear a watch above the bone rather than where I always remember wearing my watches and where I still wear my watches, on the bone. off the bone, and I find that I need to push my cuff further up my wrist to read the time, which feels odd and awkward. Not to mention that I find I need to twist my wrist just that little bit further around when glancing down to read the time. Again, it doesn't work for me. Anyway, at the risk of sounding like a waiter in a fish restaurant, do you like it on the bone or off the bone? Please share how you wear your watch in the comments below. Thank you.